The scorching Arizona sun cast long shadows across Whispering Pines Wildlife Sanctuary as Scout lay motionless, the coarse rope cutting into his neck. Once a decorated search and rescue German shepherd, his powerful frame now trembled with exhaustion. The dried blood on his coat told a story of struggle against his bindings, but his amber eyes, those windows to an intelligent soul, remained defiant. As dusk settled over the sanctuary, movement stirred beyond the tall grass. First one, then three. Then 7 massive shapes emerged, lions with hunger in their eyes, circling closer to the tied dog. Their muscles rippled beneath tawny coats as they closed in, their intentions clear. Scout didn't whimper. Instead, he raised his head toward the approaching predators, ears forward, as if accepting whatever fate awaited him. What happened next would shake the foundations of everything we thought we knew about the boundaries between humans and animals. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Whispering Pines Wildlife Sanctuary sprawled across 200 acres of Arizona desert, its perimeter marked by tall fences topped with barbed wire. What had begun 30 years ago as a passion project for Martha Thornton had morphed into a lucrative tourist attraction under her husband Richard's management. The sanctuary housed dozens of exotic animals, many rescued from illegal ownership, others bred in captivity. Among them, a pride of African lions lived in a 10-acre enclosure that backed up against the caretaker's quarters. Richard Thornton, at 72, moved through the sanctuary with the rigid authority of a man unaccustomed to being questioned. His weathered face, permanently set in disapproval, had grown harder since Martha had left him 3 years prior. The staff whispered that something in Richard had broken when his only son died overseas in combat, but no one dared mention it to his face. These days, he viewed the sanctuary solely as a business, the animals as assets with value measured in visitor dollars. Bobby Jenkins had worked the grounds for nearly 20 years. At 68, his stooped frame and calloused hands spoke of decades of hard labor. But his gentle eyes revealed a man who found purpose in caring for creatures others had abandoned. "Animals know who's got a good heart," he often said. "They can smell kindness, same as they can smell fear." Behind Richard's back, Bobby slipped extra food to the thinner animals and spoke to them in low, reassuring tones. Dr. Emily Walker had only been the sanctuary's veterinarian for 8 months. At 35, her idealism remained intact despite the realities of working under Richard's tight-fisted management. Her special way with frightened animals had earned her respect among the staff, though Richard merely tolerated her sentimental nonsense, as he called it. Deputy Sheriff Frank Wilson made regular visits to the sanctuary officially to check compliance with county regulations. Unofficially, because he'd developed a fondness for a 3-legged mountain lion he'd helped rescue from a poacher's trap. At 58, Frank carried his authority lightly, preferring resolution to confrontation whenever possible. And then there was Scout, the 8-year-old German shepherd with military tags still dangling from his worn collar. With a chest full of healed scars and eyes that seemed to understand every human word. Scout had arrived 6 months ago, under circumstances that remained unclear to most of the staff. Scout hadn't always known chains and ropes. There was a time when his name echoed across disaster zones with reverence, when his powerful legs carried him through smoke and debris to find those whom others had given up for lost. His military-grade training had made him exceptional, but it was his inexplicable sixth sense for detecting life that had made him legendary. The memories came to him now as he lay bound in the dirt flashes of his past life. The flood in Tennessee, where he'd tracked a 4-year-old girl trapped beneath collapsed beams, whimpering but alive after 36 hours. The California wildfire, where he'd led rescuers to an elderly couple huddled in a creek bed, surrounded by flames but untouched. The earthquake in Mexico, where international news had captured him, pulling a baby's blanket to draw attention to the infant buried beneath a fallen wall. That dog's got something special. His handler, Sergeant Mike Collins, used to say, "It's like he can see through walls and hear heartbeats from a mile away." Their bond had been forged through years of service unbreakable. Or so Scout had believed until the IED that took Mike's life during their final deployment. Scout had refused to leave his handler's body, standing guard until the retrieval team arrived hours later. The transition to civilian life had been arranged by someone in Mike's unit. Scout remembered the flight, the new smells, the unfamiliar hands that passed his leash from person to person. He'd been given a distinguished service ceremony somewhere with flags and cameras, but without Mike, the honors meant nothing to him. Bobby Jenkins had been the first person at Whispering Pines to treat Scout with understanding. The old groundskeeper recognized the hollow look in the dog's eyes. He'd seen it in returning veterans at his local VFW hall. "You and me are going to get along just fine," Bobby had told Scout on his first day, slipping him a beef jerky treat when Richard wasn't looking. "This place ain't perfect, but you can heal here if you let yourself. Just stay clear of the boss man when he's in one of his moods." For 6 months, Scout had followed Bobby's advice. He'd established a routine patrolling the perimeter fence each morning, napping in the shade of the maintenance shed during the afternoon heat, and accompanying Bobby on evening rounds to check on the animals. His military training remained evident in his disciplined movements and alert posture, but gradually, some of the tension had eased from his powerful frame. Emily had noticed Scout during her second week at the sanctuary. She'd been treating a zebra with an infected hoof when the German shepherd appeared silently at the stable door, watching with intelligent interest. "Well, hello there," she'd said, surprised by his sudden appearance. "You must be the famous Scout I've heard about." Scout had tilted his head, assessing her with those cognizant amber eyes that seemed to look straight through to her intentions. "You know, I think we've met before," Emily had continued, removing her latex gloves. "Were you with the Rocky Mountain Search and Rescue during the Boulder floods?" "I was volunteering with emergency medical services." Scout's ears had perked forward at the mention of Boulder, his tail giving a single, tentative wag. From that day, Scout made a point of being present whenever Emily treated the animals. He maintained a respectful distance but watched every procedure with such focused attention that Emily began explaining her treatments aloud, almost as if teaching a student. The trouble had begun 3 days ago, when Richard had acquired a new lion cub, a male with unusual coloring, that he planned to feature prominently in the sanctuary's marketing materials. The circumstances of the acquisition remained murky. The paperwork had been processed after hours, without Dr. Emily's customary health inspection. Bobby had found the cub locked in a transport cage too small for comfort, hidden in the back of the supply shed. The tiny feline was dehydrated, its paws raw from pacing on the metal grate. "This ain't right," Bobby had muttered, filling a water bowl and sliding it through the bars. "No matter what the boss says, every creature deserves basic decency." Scout who had followed Bobby on his rounds, had growled low in his throat at the sight of the suffering cub, a sound Bobby had never heard from him before. "I know. Boy, I don't like it either," Bobby had sighed, patting Scout's head. "But we gotta be smart about this. Richard's been looking for a reason to get rid of you since that incident with the school tour when you wouldn't follow his commands." But the next morning, Richard had been giving a private tour to potential investors when they'd stopped by the supply shed. Scout had been trailing behind Bobby nearby, helping the groundskeeper carry tools. "And here's my latest acquisition," Richard had announced grandly, unveiling the cage where the lion cub now lay listless, barely responding to the disturbance. "Perfectly white belly fur, extremely rare. Once he matures, he'll be the centerpiece of our breeding program." One of the visitors, a woman with kind eyes, had frowned. "He doesn't look well. Has he been examined by a vet?" Richard's face had hardened. "He's just adjusting to the new environment. Animals are more resilient than people give them credit for." When the investors had moved on, Richard had rounded on the cage, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You'd better perk up by tomorrow, you worthless investment." He jabbed a metal rod through the bars, poking the cub roughly. What happened next occurred so quickly that Bobby barely registered the sequence of events. Scout had dropped the tool bag he'd been carrying in his mouth, lunged forward with military precision, and clamped his jaws around Richard's wrist, not breaking skin, but applying unmistakable pressure. The message was clear: stop hurting the cub. Richard's face had transformed with rage. "Get this mutt off me!" he'd bellowed, his free hand striking Scout across the muzzle with enough force to send the dog staggering back. Scout had released his grip but held his ground, positioning himself between Richard and the caged cub, a low growl emanating from deep in his chest. "You've done it now, you worthless piece of fur," Richard had snarled, nursing his wrist. "Bobby, get a rope. This dog has just earned himself a one-way ticket to the edge of the property." "Doctor..." Emily was elbow-deep in paperwork when her phone buzzed with Bobby's name on the screen. She answered with her standard cheerfulness. "Emily speaking. What can I do for you?" "Bobby?" The old groundskeeper's voice came through shaky and urgent, nothing like his usual measured drawl. "Doc, we got a situation here that can't wait. It's about Scout." Emily's pen stilled mid-signature. "What's happened is he hurt. Not yet. But he's gonna be if we don't move fast." Bobby's voice dropped to a whisper. "Richard's gone and tied him up at the southeast corner, right where the lion enclosure meets the property line. Says he's teaching him a lesson for growling at him this morning." "He did what?" Emily stood so abruptly her chair crashed against the wall behind her. "That's close to where they do the evening feeding. Bobby, the lions will smell him there. That's the point. Doc, Richard knows exactly what he's doing." The bitterness in Bobby's voice was palpable. "Says a dog that bites the hand that feeds him deserves whatever comes his way." Emily grabbed her medical bag, already moving toward the door. "I'm on my way. Have you called Frank? Deputies out on a multi-car pileup on Highway 18. Won't be free for hours." Bobby's breathing was labored, like he was walking quickly. "I tried to go out there and cut Scout loose myself, but Richard's got Miguel watching the area with orders to report anyone who interferes. I could lose my job, Doc, and then who'd look out for these animals?" Emily slid into her pickup truck, throwing her bag onto the passenger seat. You did the right thing calling me. Richard can't fire me for providing medical care to an animal on the property. It's literally in my contract." As she peeled out of the clinic parking lot, a memory flashed through Emily's mind, a news segment she'd watched years ago while still in veterinary school. The reporter had been highlighting the work of search and rescue teams after a devastating hurricane. The camera had panned to a German shepherd leading rescuers through flooded streets, his focus unwavering despite the chaos. The dog's handler had called him Scout. "It can't be the same dog," Emily muttered to herself. But even as she said it, she recalled Scout's reaction when she'd mentioned the Boulder floods. The way his ears had perked up, the flash of recognition in those intelligent eyes. Her phone rang again, the sanctuary's main office number. "Dr. Walker," came Richard Thornton's cold voice without preamble. "I understand Bobby has contacted you about the German shepherd." Emily took a deep breath, forcing professionalism into her voice. "Yes, Mr. Thornton. I'm concerned about an animal under my care being placed in danger. That animal attacked me. Doctor, it's a liability I won't tolerate on my property." "With all due respect, sir, restraining a dog near predators violates every animal welfare regulation in the state. If anything happens to Scout, you'll be facing serious legal consequences." Richard's laugh was short and brittle. "Save your threats, Doctor. That dog is my property, and I'll handle it as I see fit. Consider this your official notice to stay away from the southeast section today." "That's an order." The line went dead before Emily could respond. She slammed her palm against the steering wheel, then pressed harder on the accelerator. A dust storm was brewing on the horizon, the kind that could reduce visibility to 0 in minutes. Emily knew she needed to reach the sanctuary before it hit. As the familiar gates came into view, she noted the ominous yellow-brown haze approaching from the west. Emily drove straight to the staff entrance, bypassing the main visitor area. She was reaching for her ID badge when she spotted Martha Thornton's sleek silver Mercedes parked in the reserved space, a sight that hadn't been seen at the sanctuary for nearly 3 years. Bobby was waiting by the maintenance shed, his weathered face creased with concern. "You made good time, Doc, but I'm afraid things have gotten worse." Richards moved up the lion's feeding schedule. Emily felt her blood run cold. "He can't do that. They're not supposed to be fed for another 3 hours. "Tell that to him." Bobby jerked his chin toward the main building. "He's in there now with Martha. Nobody expected her to show up today of all days. Martha's here. That might work in our favor." Emily started toward the administration building, but Bobby caught her arm. "There's something else you should know. Doc, I did some digging after Richard brought Scout here. That dog didn't just belong to any military handler. He was partnered with Lieutenant Michael Thornton." Emily stopped in her tracks. "Richard's son?" Bobby nodded grimly. "The very same. Richard never mentioned it to anyone. But I found the transfer papers when I was filing last month's vet records. Scout was supposed to retire here peacefully, at least that's what Martha thought. I reckon Richard has been looking for a reason to get rid of him since day one." The implications hit Emily like a physical blow. "So this isn't just about Scout defending that lion cub. This is personal for Richard." "Grief does strange things to a man," Bobby said softly. "Sometimes it's easier to hate what reminds you of your pain than to face it head on." A commotion from the main building interrupted their conversation as the door flew open. Martha Thornton emerged, her elegant posture at odds with the fury etched across her face. Richard followed. his expression equally thunderous. "You had no right to make that decision without consulting me," Martha was saying, her voice carrying across the yard. "I'm still listed as co-owner of this sanctuary, regardless of our personal situation, and I'm still the one who runs this place day to day." Richard shot back. "That dog is dangerous, Martha. It's showing the same stubborn defiance that got our son killed." Martha recoiled as if slapped. "How dare you? Michael died serving his country, not because of some perceived character flaw you projected onto him." Emily approached cautiously, making her presence known with a discreet cough. "Mrs. Thornton, I'm Dr. Emily Walker, the sanctuary's veterinarian." Martha turned, composing herself with visible effort. "Dr. Walker, Bobby has told me about your work here. I understand you're concerned about Scout." "Very concerned, ma'am. He's been restrained in an unsafe location, and with the feeding schedule changed—" "The schedule remains as I've set it," Richard interrupted coldly. "And you, Doctor, are overstepping your authority." A distant rumble of thunder punctuated his words as the dust storm crept closer to the sanctuary's perimeter. In the same moment, Emily's phone chimed with a weather alert severe storm warning for the next 6 hours. "Richard," Martha said, her voice dropping to a dangerous quiet, "if anything happens to Michael's dog, I will personally ensure that this sanctuary is investigated by every animal welfare organization in the country." Richard's face flushed dark with anger, but before he could respond, a frantic shout came from the direction of the lion enclosure. "Mr. Thornton!" It was Miguel, the junior keeper, running toward them with panic written across his face. "The gate to the lion enclosure, it's open. I don't know how it happened, but they're out." Bobby's eyes met Emily's in horror, and heading straight for where Scout is tied. The dust storm swept across the sanctuary like a living thing, swallowing fences and buildings in its murky embrace. Emily's truck fishtailed on the gravel road as she navigated toward the southeast corner, visibility dropping by the second. Bobby had squeezed into the passenger seat, his arthritic knees pressed awkwardly against the dashboard, while Martha Thornton had insisted on following in her own vehicle. "Take this service road," Bobby directed, pointing to a barely visible turn. "It'll get us closer to where Richard had Scout tied up." The truck's headlights carved weak tunnels through the swirling dust. Emily hunched forward over the steering wheel, her knuckles white. "How many lions are we talking about?" "Bobby, 7 in total, the main pride, 4 females, 2 younger males, and old Caesar, the alpha." Bobby braced himself as the truck bounced through a pothole. "Caesar's getting on in years, but he's still dangerous when riled. The real wild card is Serena, the oldest female. She's smarter than most humans I know." Emily's phone rang through the truck's speakers. "Richard Thornton." "Where the hell are you going? Walker!" His voice filled the cab, tight with barely controlled fury. "I'm doing my job. Mr. Thornton, there's an animal in danger on your property." "You turn that truck around right now. I've got staff handling the lions." Bobby leaned toward the speaker. "With what?" "Richard Garden hoses and courage. Those boys aren't trained for loose predators." "Stay out of this, Jenkins. You're already on thin ice." Martha's voice broke in, apparently having connected to the same call. "Richard, stop this madness immediately. Call the wildlife response team. And have this splashed across the local news. Dangerous predators escape at Whispering Pines. That'll really help ticket sales." "Martha, Emily cut through the argument. "Mr. Thornton, we don't have time for this. There's a dust storm hitting. You have 7 apex predators loose, and an animal tied up in their path. This isn't about your ego or the sanctuary's reputation anymore. It's about preventing a tragedy." The line went silent for a moment before Richard responded, his voice eerily calm. "You want to play hero. Dr. Walker, fine. But understand this. You're on your own. I've ordered all staff to the visitor center for safety. Whatever happens out there is your responsibility now." The call disconnected abruptly. "Stubborn old fool," Bobby muttered. "Been that way since I've known him, but never this reckless." Emily pressed harder on the accelerator. "Tell me about Scout. If when we reach him, I need to know what to expect. Will he be aggressive after being restrained like this?" Bobby shook his head. "Not Scout. That dog's got more discipline than most soldiers I knew in Nam. But he's been out there for hours now without water in this heat. He'll be weak, maybe disoriented." "And his relationship with Richard's son? You said he was Lieutenant Thornton's partner?" Bobby's weathered face softened with memory. "Michael brought Scout by a couple times when they were on leave. You never saw such a bond between man and animal like they could read each other's minds. After Michael was killed, Martha arranged for Scout to retire here. I think she saw it as keeping a piece of her son alive. But Richard saw it differently," Emily concluded. "Richard couldn't bear looking at that dog every day, a living reminder of what he'd lost." Bobby gazed out at the swirling dust. "Grief can curdle into something ugly if you let it." They drove in silence for another minute before Bobby pointed ahead. "Stop here. We'll have to go on foot from this point. The post where Scout was tied is about 100 yards that way." Emily grabbed her medical kit and a powerful flashlight from behind the seat. As she stepped out, the wind nearly knocked her sideways, dust immediately coating her skin and clothes. She pulled a bandana over her nose and mouth. Martha's Mercedes pulled up behind them, its luxury seeming absurdly out of place in the wild conditions. The elegant woman emerged wearing practical hiking boots that contrasted with her expensive slacks prepared despite her refined appearance. "We need to hurry," Martha called over the wind. "I know these storms. It's going to get worse before it gets better." The three of them moved forward in a tight group, Emily's flashlight beam cutting through the dust. The visibility had dropped to less than 20 feet, transforming the familiar sanctuary into an alien landscape. "Listen," Bobby said suddenly, raising a hand. Above the wind's howl came another sound, a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Lions," Martha whispered unnecessarily. Emily swept her flashlight in a wide arc, catching nothing but swirling dust until there a pair of reflective eyes flashed briefly before disappearing. "They're circling us," Bobby said, his voice remarkably steady. "Stay close together and keep moving forward. No sudden movements." Emily's heart hammered against her ribs as they continued their cautious advance. The growls grew more frequent, occasionally punctuated by the sound of heavy paws on dry earth. "There he is," Martha gasped suddenly, pointing ahead. The flashlight beam found Scout, still tied to the metal post that normally supported an educational sign about desert flora. The German shepherd was standing despite his obvious exhaustion, his posture alert as he faced outward into the storm. Even restrained and threatened, he maintained the bearing of a soldier at his post, and around him, almost like sentinels themselves, were 3 lionesses not attacking but positioned in a loose triangle with Scout at the center. I don't believe it, Bobby breathed. They're not hunting him. They're— He struggled to find the right word. Guarding him. Emily studied the scene, professional interest momentarily overriding her fear. It's not unheard of for different species to form unusual bonds in captivity. But this is— A thunderous roar cut her off as a massive shape loomed out of the dust Caesar. The male lion, his dark mane collected with dirt and debris from the storm. He approached the group of lionesses, his attention fixed on the humans. "Don't run," Martha warned under her breath. "Whatever you do, don't run." Caesar advanced another step, his muscles bunching visibly beneath his tawny coat. Emily felt her legs trembling with the primal instinct to flee, but she held her ground beside the others. Then something remarkable happened. Scout barked a sharp, authoritative sound that cut through the wind's moan. Caesar paused, turning his massive head toward the German shepherd. Scout barked again, 3 times in rapid succession. To Emily's astonishment, the big lion huffed once, then settled onto his haunches, still watching the humans, but no longer advancing. "I'll be damned," Bobby whispered. "That military training's coming in handy." "It's not just training," Martha said softly. "Michael always said Scout could communicate with any animal. I thought he was exaggerating. But now—" Emily didn't waste time questioning this unexpected reprieve. "I need to check his condition and get him free. Cover me." "Cover you with what?" Bobby asked incredulously. "A stern talking to for the king of beasts." But Emily was already moving forward slowly, medical bag clutched in one hand, the other extended palm down in a non-threatening gesture. She approached from the side, letting Scout see and scent her clearly. "Hey there, Scout," she called softly. "Remember me? Dr. Emily from the infirmary. I'm here to help you. Boy?" Scout's ears pricked forward, recognition flickering in his intelligent eyes. He gave a soft whine, the first sign of distress he'd shown despite his dire situation. The nearest lioness, Serena, Emily presumed from Bobby's description, watched with unnerving intensity, but didn't interfere as Emily reached the post. Up close, she could see that Scout's condition was even worse than feared. The rope had rubbed his neck raw, and his gums showed signs of dehydration when she gently lifted his lip. "You're a brave boy," she murmured as she set to work on the knots. "Just a little longer now." Back by the vehicles, Bobby was telling Martha about Scout's history, filling in the gaps she didn't know about her son's partner. "Michael would write to me about their missions," Martha said, her voice thick with emotion. "He said Scout saved his unit 3 times before." She trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. Bobby nodded, understanding. War dogs don't get the recognition they deserve. They serve just as hard as any soldier, and when they come home they carry the same burdens. "Richard never wanted Michael to enlist," Martha continued. "They fought bitterly about it. When we got the news—" She wrapped her arms around herself, whether against the wind or the memory. It wasn't clear. Something broke in Richard that day. He sold his business, poured everything into expanding this sanctuary. I thought it was his way of honoring Michael's love of animals. But now I wonder if it was just another way to control something when he couldn't control his grief. Their conversation was interrupted by a shout from Emily. "The rope stuck, the knots pulled too tight, and I don't have anything to cut it with." Bobby patted his pockets frantically. "I left my pocket knife in the maintenance shed. Damn these old man moments." Martha was already moving toward Emily, pulling something from her jacket, a small silver multi-tool. "Michael's," she explained as she pressed it into Emily's hand. "I've carried it since they sent his personal effects home." Emily flipped open the knife blade and sawed at the thick rope, aware of the lions shifting restlessly around them. The storm was intensifying, the wind now strong enough to make standing difficult. Sand and debris pelted them mercilessly. "Almost there," she encouraged Scout, who remained statue still to make her work easier. "Just one more." A gunshot cracked through the howling wind. The lions scattered instantly, vanishing into the swirling dust as if they'd never been there. Scout's body tensed beneath Emily's hands, military training evident in his immediate alertness. "Step away from that animal." Richard Thornton's voice carried through the storm, followed by his figure materializing from the dust cloud, shotgun braced against his shoulder. 2 sanctuary staff flanked him, looking deeply uncomfortable with the situation. Martha moved to stand between her estranged husband and the others. "Put the gun down, Richard. You're making a dangerous situation worse." "I told you all to stay away," Richard said, his voice eerily calm despite the chaos around them. "This is my sanctuary, and I will handle this my way." Emily continued sawing at the rope, ignoring Richard's order. "Your way involves animal cruelty and endangering lives, including your own staff. That dog," Richard spat the word, "is a reminder of everything I've lost. Michael would still be alive if he hadn't been so determined to play the hero." "Michael lived the life he chose," Martha countered, her voice gaining strength. "He died saving his teammates because that's who he was, who we raised him to be. And Scout was there with him until the end. Richard, they recovered Michael's body because Scout refused to leave his side, even under fire." The rope finally gave way under Emily's blade. Scout stood free but didn't bolt instead. He positioned himself in front of Emily, a living shield between her and the shotgun. Richard's face contorted at the sight. "Still protecting humans, even after what we've done to you." The shotgun wavered in his hands. "Why couldn't you have protected my son this well?" The raw pain in his voice hung in the air between them all. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind and their labored breathing. Then Scout did something unexpected. Slowly, deliberately, he walked toward Richard, stopping just feet away from the man who had condemned him to death. The German shepherd sat, his posture perfect despite his exhaustion, and looked up at Richard with what could only be described as compassion. "He doesn't blame you," Bobby said quietly, witnessing the moment. "Dogs don't carry grudges like we do. Richard's face crumpled, the rigid anger giving way to something more vulnerable. The shotgun lowered incrementally. The moment was shattered by a frantic call over the radio, clipped to one of the staff members' belts. "Central to any staff in Sector 4, we've got multiple fence breaches from the storm damage. Repeat, the perimeter is compromised in Sectors 4 and 5. Richard snapped back to attention. "What about the visitors?" "All secured in the main building," came the crackling reply. "But we've got reports of at least 3 lions moving toward the highway." The implications were immediate, and sobering lions loose near a public road could lead to tragedy for both humans and animals. The sanctuary's future, Richard's freedom, and most importantly, innocent lives hung in the balance. Emily looked at Scout, who was already alert, ears forward as if understanding the crisis. Despite everything he'd endured, she recognized the readiness in his posture, a working dog eager to do what he was trained for. "Richard," she said, making a decision that might save them all. "Scout can track them." Richard stared at her incredulously. "In this storm, impossible." "Not for him," Martha said, newfound confidence in her voice. "Michael said Scout could track through anything, flood, fire, or sandstorm. It's what he was trained for." Bobby nodded agreement. "I've seen him locate a lost kid who wandered off from a tour group last spring. Found her in 10 minutes when 15 staff members couldn't." Richard looked from his estranged wife to the veterinarian to the dog who had once been his son's closest companion. The storm raged around them, the situation deteriorating by the minute, and with it, Richard's carefully constructed control. "If those lions reach the highway," one of the staff members started anxiously, "they'll be shot on sight by highway patrol." Richard finished grimly. He looked at Scout again, really seeing him perhaps for the first time. "Can you really find them?" "Boy." Scout stood, shaking off some of the dust from his coat, and gave a single, clear bark. Emily quickly assessed Scout's condition with a professional eye. "He needs water, and ideally a proper medical check. But he seems determined." "Like Michael," Richard said softly, the fight draining from him. "Always so damn determined." Martha approached her husband cautiously, placing a hand on his arm. "Let Scout help, Richard. It's what Michael would want, his two worlds working together." Richard hesitated, decades of bitterness warring with the urgent needs of the present moment. Finally, he nodded once, sharply. "Do it. But Dr. Walker goes with him." Emily didn't hesitate. "I'll need a radio, water for Scout, and tranquilizer darts in case we need to subdue the lions safely." As the staff rushed to gather supplies, Bobby leaned close to Emily. "Scout won't let you down, Doc, but watch yourself out there." "This storm's getting worse, and there's more than lions to worry about." Emily nodded, accepting a radio and water canteen from one of the returning staff members. She knelt beside Scout, checking his neck wound quickly and offering him water, which he drank eagerly but efficiently, wasting not a drop. "Ready for one more mission, boy?" she asked, looking into those intelligent amber eyes. Scout's response was to turn toward the western perimeter, nose lifting to catch scents through the dust-laden air. His purpose had been restored, and with it, a visible renewal of strength flowed through his battered body. As Emily prepared to follow Scout into the heart of the storm, she caught Martha's eye. The older woman nodded once, a gesture of trust and hope. Even Richard stood watching, the shotgun now pointed safely at the ground, his expression unreadable through the swirling dust. The sanctuary's future, and perhaps Richard's redemption, now rested on the shoulders of the very animal he had tried to destroy. The irony wasn't lost on any of them as Scout led Emily into the blinding storm, his mission clear: find the lions before tragedy could strike. The world had narrowed to a tunnel of swirling dust, Scout's tan form barely visible a few feet ahead as he navigated the chaos with unflinching confidence. Emily struggled to keep pace, her bandana now soaked with sweat and condensation from her labored breathing. Her radio crackled with intermittent updates from the command center, most rendered unintelligible by static and the howling wind. Scout moved with renewed purpose, his training overriding his physical discomfort. The raw wound around his neck where the rope had cut in was beginning to crust over, but Emily knew infection would set in without proper treatment. Still, there was no stopping now, not with lives at stake. Central to Dr. Walker. Her radio squawked, Richard's voice breaking through the interference. Satellite tracking shows the storm intensifying over your position. Do you copy? Emily pressed the talk button. I copy. We're continuing pursuit. Scout has a direction. Highway Patrol reports traffic stopped about a mile from the east perimeter. They've got a visual on at least one lion. Local news is already on scene. The situation was escalating faster than Emily had feared. Tell them not to shoot unless absolutely necessary. We're making progress. Scout paused suddenly, his body tensing as he tested the air. He looked back at Emily, then deliberately changed course, heading northeast. He's got something, Emily reported into the radio. Heading toward the highway now. Scout broke into a run, and Emily pushed herself to keep up, her lungs burning with exertion. They crested a small rise, and through a momentary break in the dust cloud, Emily caught sight of the highway below a line of stopped cars, emergency lights flashing, and unmistakably, a tawny shape moving along the roadside barrier. Visual confirmation, she gasped into the radio. One lion at the highway. Can you identify which one? Bobby's voice came through. Emily squinted. Looks like one of the younger males. No full mane yet. That'll be Simba, Bobby replied, strain evident in his voice. He's the most skittish of the pride, unpredictable when scared. Scout had already calculated their approach. Circling wide to get downwind of the young lion, Emily followed his lead, trusting his instincts over her human logic. She unclipped the tranquilizer gun from her belt, checking that the dart was properly loaded. As they drew closer, the situation at the highway became clearer. Highway patrol officers had created a perimeter, keeping tourists and news crews at a safe distance, but their hands hovered near their service weapons. The young lion paced nervously along the concrete barrier, confused and agitated by the unfamiliar surroundings and the gathering crowd. I need 30 seconds with no sirens, no loud noises, Emily radioed. Tell Highway Patrol to hold their position. She needn't have worried about Scout. He had already positioned himself perfectly, belly crawling through the brush until he was within 50 yards of Simba. Emily marveled at his tactical approach, so clearly the product of military training. The young lion sensed something and whirled, facing Scout's direction with a rumbling growl. Emily froze, tranquilizer gun half raised, afraid any movement would trigger an attack or flight. What happened next defied everything Emily understood about animal behavior. Scout rose slowly to a standing position, fully exposing himself to the lion. Then, deliberately, he lowered his head and shoulders in what appeared to be a submissive posture, before giving 3 short, sharp barks. Simba's aggressive stance faltered. The lion tilted his head, ears flicking forward with curiosity rather than aggression. Scout barked once more, then turned and trotted a few paces back toward the sanctuary before stopping to look over his shoulder. He's communicating with it, Emily whispered, too astounded to press her radio button. Simba hesitated, looking between Scout and the highway full of humans. Scout barked again, more insistently this time, and took another few steps toward the sanctuary. To Emily's amazement, the young lion began to follow, maintaining a cautious distance but clearly responding to Scout's guidance. She stayed motionless, barely breathing, as the German shepherd led the confused predator away from the highway and back toward sanctuary grounds. "Dr. Walker to command," she finally managed to radio. "You're not going to believe this, but Scout is herding Simba back to the sanctuary. No tranquilizer needed. I'm following at a safe distance." The radio exploded with exclamations and questions, which Emily ignored. She needed to focus on the unfolding miracle before her. Scout maintained a perfect pace, quick enough to keep Simba's interest, slow enough to allow the lion to follow comfortably. Every few yards, he would stop and look back, ensuring his unlikely charge was still following. It was a master class in animal communication, performed by a dog who should have been too traumatized and exhausted for such precision work. They were halfway back to the sanctuary perimeter when Emily's radio crackled again. "Dr. Walker," Richard's voice came through, unusually subdued. "We've located the other 2 lions. They're at the visitor center." Emily stopped in her tracks. "The visitor center? I thought everyone was secured inside." "They are. The lions aren't trying to get in, they're just waiting by the main doors. Staff reports they appear calm." A suspicion formed in Emily's mind. "Is one of them Serena, the older female?" "Affirmative," Richard replied. "Serena and one of the younger females." Emily watched as Scout continued his careful herding of Simba. "I think I understand what's happening, Mr. Thornton. The lions aren't behaving like escaped predators, they're behaving like a coordinated search party." "That's ridiculous," Richard scoffed, but without his usual venom. "Is it Scout was able to track the lions through this storm? Maybe they were able to track him too." Emily pressed forward, following the unlikely pair ahead of her. "We're about 10 minutes from the south entrance. Have a containment team ready, but tell them to follow my lead." The sanctuary's perimeter fence came into view through the swirling dust. A section lay crumpled where the storm had thrown a large acacia tree across it. Scout guided Simba directly toward the opening, then stopped, allowing the young lion to proceed inside sanctuary grounds first before following. Emily approached the breach cautiously, radioing her position. Within minutes, 2 sanctuary vehicles arrived, staff members carefully deploying portable barriers to secure the opening once Simba was safely through. "1 down, 2 to go," Bobby called from one of the vehicles. "Martha's coordinating at the visitor center. Richard's there too." Emily climbed into the vehicle, grateful to be out of the punishing wind. Scout jumped in beside her without prompting, his sides heaving with exertion, but his eyes still alert. "You're one hell of a dog," Emily told him, offering her water bottle. Scout drank gratefully before settling on the floor, his body pressed against her legs as if to reassure her of his presence. The drive to the visitor center took longer than usual, the vehicles crawling through near zero visibility. When they finally arrived, the scene before them was extraordinary. 2 lionesses sat calmly at the main entrance, ignoring the astonished faces pressed against the glass doors from inside. "I'll be damned," Bobby whispered. They really were looking for him. Scout perked up at the sight of the lionesses, giving a soft whine. When Emily opened the vehicle door, he jumped out immediately, approaching the big cats with confidence. Serena, the older female, rose to meet him, and for a heart-stopping moment, Emily feared she'd misjudged the situation entirely, but Serena merely touched her nose to Scouts in a gesture almost like greeting, before turning toward the now open service entrance where Richard and Martha stood watching in disbelief. "Get the tranquilizer ready," Richard ordered one of the staff members, his hand gripping a catch-pole tightly. "Wait," Emily called, holding up her hand. "Let's see what happens." Scout led the two lionesses toward the service entrance, maintaining a dignified pace despite his exhaustion. The big cats followed with surprising docility, their eyes fixed on the German shepherd as if he were their unlikely alpha. Richard stood his ground as the procession approached, his knuckles white around the catch-pole. Martha placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Trust him, Richard. Trust Michael's dog." Scout stopped a few yards from the humans, positioning himself between them and the lionesses in a clear, protective stance. He looked directly at Richard, and in that gaze was a challenge that transcended species, a demand for recognition, for respect. For several heartbeats, no one moved. The storm raged around them, but in that small space between man and animals, time seemed suspended. Then Richard did something no one expected. He lowered the catch-pole and took a single step forward. "Good job, soldier," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Scout's posture relaxed fractionally. He gave a single bark, which seemed to communicate something to the lionesses, who remained calm despite the proximity to humans. "Dr. Walker," Richard said without taking his eyes off Scout, "how do we safely get these cats back to their enclosure?" Emily moved forward slowly, her professional demeanor returning now that the immediate crisis was passing. "The enclosure gate is still open, if Scout can lead them there. I think they'll follow." "You think—" Richard raised an eyebrow. "This is hardly a situation covered in veterinary school. Mr. Thornton," Emily replied. "But yes, I think they'll follow him. They've been doing it so far." Richard nodded once, sharply. "Do it!" With a team of staff following at a respectful distance, Scout led the procession through the sanctuary. The two lionesses padded behind him, occasionally glancing at the humans but showing no aggression. Simba had already been secured, and radio reports confirmed the remaining members of the Pride had returned to the enclosure on their own. The storm was beginning to abate by the time they reached the lion habitat, visibility improving enough to see the open gate and the shadowy forms of the other lions waiting inside. Scout paused at the threshold, looking back at Emily as if seeking confirmation. "It's okay, boy," she assured him. "Job well done." Scout gave another of those authoritative barks, and Serena responded with a rumbling sound deep in her chest before walking regretfully past him into the enclosure. The younger female followed, and sanctuary staff quickly secured the gate behind them. Only when the last lock clicked into place did Scout finally allow his exhaustion to show. His legs trembled visibly, and he sank to the ground, sides heaving with each labored breath. Emily rushed to his side, her medical training taking over as she quickly assessed his condition. "He's crashing," she announced. "The adrenaline's wearing off, and he's severely dehydrated. I need to get him to the clinic immediately." Richard had been watching the scene unfold with an unreadable expression. Now he stepped forward, crouching beside the exhausted dog. "Will he make it?" Emily met his gaze directly. "That depends on whether you're still determined to put him down." A tense silence followed her blunt question. Martha joined them, kneeling in the dirt beside Scout without regard for her expensive clothes. She stroked his head gently. "He saved your sanctuary today, Richard. He saved all of us." Richard looked at the German shepherd, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time, seeing not just a painful reminder of his lost son, but the extraordinary animal his son had loved. "Get him whatever he needs, Doctor," he said finally. "Spare no expense." 2 staff members brought a stretcher, and they carefully lifted Scout onto it. As they carried him toward the clinic, Richard fell into step beside Emily. "I've spent 3 years blaming him," Richard said quietly. "Blaming him for not protecting Michael, for surviving when my son didn't." "That's not how partnership works," Emily replied, keeping her eyes on Scout's rising and falling chest. "They protect each other, but sometimes the mission comes first. I think Michael would have been proud of how Scout performed today." Richard nodded, a muscle working in his jaw. "Martha wants to stay, to help run the sanctuary again." Emily glanced at him sideways. "Is that what you want?" "What I want," Richard said slowly, "is to stop living with this anger. I'm too old and too tired to keep carrying it." They reached the clinic, where the staff carefully transferred Scout to an examination table. Emily immediately set to work, inserting an IV line for fluids and cleaning the wound on his neck. "Will you tell me," Richard asked, watching from the doorway, "what happened out there with the lions? The truth, not some diplomatic version." Emily's hands remained steady as she worked. "The truth is that I don't fully understand it myself. But I think Scout recognized something in Serena when she was near him earlier, some kind of connection. And she recognized something in him too. A German shepherd and a lioness," Richard said with a hint of his old skepticism. "2 predators," Emily corrected gently. 2 intelligent, social animals who found common ground somehow. She checked Scout's vital signs, relieved to find them stabilizing. "Animals are more complex than we give them credit for, Mr. Thornton. Sometimes they forge connections that defy our understanding." Richard watched in silence as Emily continued treating Scout. Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. The sanctuary had survived, but everything had changed. The boundaries between captive and captor, predator and prey, had been blurred in ways none of them could have anticipated. And at the center of it all lay Scout, his breathing growing stronger with each passing minute, his remarkable journey not yet complete. Night had fallen by the time Emily completed Scout's treatment. The clinic's soft lighting cast gentle shadows across the treatment room as she adjusted his IV drip and checked his vitals one final time. The German shepherd lay on a padded bed, his chest rising and falling in the deep rhythm of exhausted sleep. The angry red line around his neck had been cleaned, treated with antibiotics, and dressed with a light bandage. An array of monitoring equipment beeped softly, confirming what Emily already knew: Scout was stable, but far from recovered. "You should get some rest yourself, Doc," Bobby said from the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. "You've been going non-stop for nearly 12 hours. Emily rolled her shoulders, feeling the accumulated tension of the day crystallized into knots of pain. "I want to stay with him through the night. After what he's been through, he shouldn't wake up alone." Bobby nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. He set down a thermos and a paper bag on the counter. Martha sent over some coffee and sandwiches. Said to tell you it's the least she could do. How are things out there? Emily asked, accepting the thermos gratefully. Cleanup's underway. Storm did a fair bit of damage, 3 sections of perimeter fencing down. The education pavilion lost half its roof, and there's debris scattered from hell to breakfast. Bobby settled into the chair beside her with a grunt that spoke of aging joints and bone-deep weariness. But the animals are all accounted for, and nobody got hurt. That's the miracle in all this. Emily glanced at Scout. Not nobody. No, Bobby agreed softly. Not nobody? They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The only sounds the gentle hum of medical equipment and Scout's occasional dream whimpers. Richard's been holed up in his office since you brought Scout in, Bobby finally said. Martha's with him. Martha's with... First time they've been in the same room for more than 10 minutes without arguing in 3 years, according to the staff gossip. Emily sipped her coffee, savoring the rich warmth. He seemed different. At the end there, like something had shifted. Grief's a funny thing, Bobby mused, his gaze distant. It can harden a man, turn him mean and small, or it can crack him open. Let the light back in. Sometimes it takes a shock to the system to move from one to the other. He nodded toward Scout. I reckon watching that dog save his sanctuary, after what Richard tried to do to him, well, that's the kind of shock that makes a man take stock. A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Deputy Frank Wilson stood in the doorway, his uniform dusty and his expression grave. Evening, Doc, Bobby, he greeted them with the tip of his hat. Thought I'd stop by and check on our hero before I head back to the station. Emily gestured him in. He's stable, dehydrated, exhausted, and that neck wound will take time to heal completely. But he'll make a full recovery with proper care. Frank approached the bed, studying Scout with genuine admiration. Heard what he did out there. Wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen the highway patrol footage myself. He shook his head in wonder. Leading a lion like it was a lost puppy. 3 lions. All told, Bobby corrected with quiet pride. Saved the sanctuary's reputation, and probably saved those cats from getting shot, too. Frank's expression sobered. That's partly why I'm here. There's been some complications. News crews got footage of the whole highway incident. It's running on every local channel, and the nationals have picked it up, too. Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. What kind of complications? The kind that involve phrases like animal endangerment and reckless disregard for public safety. Frank removed his hat, turning it in his hands uncomfortably. I've got the County Animal Welfare Board breathing down my neck, demanding a full investigation into how those lions got loose, and why a dog was tied up near their enclosure. Richard, Emily breathed, the implications hitting her. They could shut down the sanctuary. At minimum, Frank confirmed grimly. Richard could be looking at criminal charges too, depending on what the investigation turns up. Bobby stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum. That's not right. Richard made a terrible mistake today, but he's dedicated 30 years to these animals. You can't just, it's not up to me, Bobby. Frank interrupted gently. I'm just giving you folks a heads up because I care about this place too. The investigators will be here first thing tomorrow morning. The gravity of the situation settled over the room like a physical weight. The sanctuary, for all its flaws under Richard's recent management, was home to dozens of animals that couldn't be released into the wild. A closure would mean uncertain futures for all of them and for the staff who cared for them. "Does Richard know?" Emily asked. Frank nodded. "Just came from his office. That's the other reason I stopped by." He hesitated, glancing at Scout's sleeping form. "He's asking for you. Doc says he needs to talk about Scout before the investigators arrive." Emily felt a flash of protective anger. "If he thinks he can convince me to cover for him." "It's not like that," Frank assured her quickly. "He seemed different. Martha was there too. They wanted to talk to you together." Emily looked at Scout, reluctant to leave him even for a moment. Bobby seemed to read her mind. "Go on," he encouraged. "I'll stay with him. Promised that boy I'd look out for him anyway, and I aim to keep my word." After a moment's hesitation, Emily nodded. She checked Scout's vitals one last time, then followed Frank out of the clinic and across the darkened sanctuary grounds toward the administration building. The night air was cool and clear after the storm, stars emerging in brilliant constellations overhead. The only sounds were their footsteps on the gravel path and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. Richard's office occupied the entire top floor of the administration building, a space designed to overlook the sanctuary's main grounds. As Emily entered, she was struck by how different it felt from their previous encounters. The harsh overhead lights had been replaced by the warm glow of a single desk lamp. Richard sat not behind his imposing desk, but in one of the visitor chairs, his posture lacking its usual rigid authority. Martha occupied the chair beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Dr. Walker." Richard acknowledged her entrance with a nod. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit down." Emily took the offered seat. Noting the subtle changes in Richard's appearance, the loosened tie, the uncharacteristic disarray of his usually immaculate gray hair, the redness around his eyes that suggested recent emotion. "How is he?" Martha asked, genuine concern in her voice. "Stable," Emily replied. "He'll need several days of rest and care, but he should recover completely." Richard cleared his throat. "I understand from Deputy Wilson that we're facing an investigation tomorrow." "Yes," Emily confirmed, watching him carefully. "The sanctuary could be in serious trouble." "I could be in serious trouble," Richard corrected, meeting her gaze directly. "Let's be clear about that. Dr. Walker, what happened today was my responsibility, my decision, my—" He faltered momentarily. "My mistake." The admission hung in the air between them, all the more powerful for its unexpectedness. Martha squeezed his arm gently. "Richard and I have been talking. Emily, may I call you Emily? We've made some decisions about Scout and about the sanctuary's future, but we need your help." Emily leaned forward slightly. "What kind of help?" Richard reached for a folder on his desk, handing it to Emily. Inside was a legal document, a transfer of ownership for Scout, with Emily's name listed as the recipient. "I want you to take him," Richard said simply. "Legally, permanently." Emily stared at the document in confusion. "I don't understand. Just hours ago, you were ready to—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. "To kill him," Richard completed bluntly. "Yes," And now I'm trying, in some small way, to make amends for that unforgivable lapse in judgment." He gestured to the document. "Scout deserves a home with someone who recognizes his value, who cares for him properly." "But what about the sanctuary?" Emily asked. "If the investigation goes badly, Martha and I are prepared to step down from ownership," Richard interrupted. "We've spent the last few hours drawing up papers to transfer the sanctuary to a non-profit trust with a professional board of directors." He smiled faintly at Emily's obvious surprise. "Don't look so shocked. Doctor, even old dogs can learn new tricks, given sufficient motivation." Martha leaned forward, her elegant features animated with newfound purpose. "We want you on that board. Emily, you and Bobby both, people who truly care about the animals, not just the bottom line." Emily tried to process this dramatic reversal. "Why now? Why not before it came to this?" Richard's expression darkened with shame. "Pride, stubbornness, grief that I never properly addressed." He stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the sanctuary illuminated by security lights. "When Michael died, I buried myself in expanding this place, making it profitable. As if success could somehow fill the hole he left behind, I stopped seeing the animals as living beings and started seeing them as assets." He turned back to face Emily, his features softened by genuine remorse. "Today, I watched as the animal I had condemned to death saved everything I've built. I watched him lead those lions with more dignity and courage than I've shown in years." His voice grew hoarse. "I saw my son in him, Dr. Walker, not as a painful reminder of what I'd lost, but as a living embodiment of what Michael valued: service, sacrifice, loyalty." Martha joined her husband at the window, standing close, but not quite touching. "We can't change what happened today, but we can ensure it never happens again. And that Scout is protected for the rest of his life." Emily looked down at the ownership transfer in her hands, then back at the couple before her. In their faces, she saw genuine regret and determination, the first steps toward redemption. "What do you need from me?" she asked finally. "Tell the investigators the truth." Richard said without hesitation, "All of it. I'll do the same. Whatever consequences come, I'll face them." Emily nodded slowly, a plan already forming in her mind. "I'll help however I can, but my priority has to be Scout's well-being." "As it should be," Martha agreed warmly. "That's exactly why we want you to have him." As the conversation continued into the night, none of them noticed the silent figure watching from the lion enclosure across the grounds. Serena stood motionless at the fence line, her amber eyes fixed on the clinic building where Scout lay recovering, a sentinel keeping her own kind of vigil over an unlikely ally. Morning arrived with the soft, golden light particular to the desert, illuminating the sanctuary's storm damage in stark relief. Emily had managed a few hours of restless sleep on a cot beside Scout's bed, waking frequently to check his vitals and adjust his medications. She was reviewing his latest blood work results when the clinic door swung open to reveal Martha, carrying a tray with coffee and breakfast. "I thought you could use this," Martha said, setting the tray down on a nearby counter. "Bobby tells me you barely left his side all night." Emily accepted the coffee gratefully. He had a rough patch around 3 a.m. Fever spiked briefly. It's under control now, but I didn't want to risk leaving him. Martha approached Scout's bed, her expression softening as she gazed down at the sleeping German shepherd. His breathing was deeper and more regular this morning, his body finally surrendering to the healing process. "He looks better already," she observed. "Stronger." "He's a fighter," Emily agreed. "Military dogs are bred for resilience, and Scout seems exceptional, even by those standards." Martha reached out tentatively, her manicured fingers hovering over Scout's head before gently stroking between his ears. "I've been going through Michael's old letters," she said quietly. "He wrote about Scout in almost every one. Did you know they were paired together? When Scout was just a year old, Michael described it as meeting his soul in another species." Emily watched the tenderness in Martha's expression, seeing glimpses of the mother beneath the polished exterior. "He must have been an extraordinary young man." "He was," Martha confirmed, a wistful smile touching her lips. "Stubborn like his father, but with a gentleness that was all his own. When he told us he was enlisting, Richard was furious, wanted him to take over the family business instead. They didn't speak for months." Her fingers continued their gentle, rhythmic stroking of Scout's fur. "The irony is that they were so alike, both passionate about their convictions, both unwilling to back down when they believed they were right." The clinic door opened again, and Bobby entered with Deputy Wilson and two unfamiliar figures in pressed uniforms. "Morning, Doc," Bobby greeted her, his expression telegraphing an unspoken warning. "These folks are from the County Animal Welfare Board. They'd like to ask some questions about yesterday's events." Emily straightened, smoothing her rumpled scrubs. "Of course. I was expecting you." The older of the two officials, a stern-looking woman in her 50s with a clipboard clutched to her chest, stepped forward. "Dr. Emily Walker. I'm Director Patricia Simmons. This is my colleague, Inspector James Morales. We're conducting an official investigation into multiple reported violations of animal welfare regulations and public safety protocols." Martha moved to stand beside Emily, her bearing shifting seamlessly into that of the sanctuary's co-owner. "I'm Martha Thornton. My husband is expecting you as well. But perhaps we could begin here, since Dr. Walker needs to remain with her patient." Director Simmons consulted her clipboard, "Your patient being the German shepherd involved in yesterday's incident." "Yes," Emily confirmed. "Scout is still in critical condition following his ordeal." Inspector Morales approached Scout's bed, studying the bandages around his neck with professional detachment. "These injuries are consistent with being restrained inappropriately. Is that correct, Doctor?" Emily met his gaze steadily. "Yes." Scout was tied to a metal post with a rope that was too tight, causing lacerations to his neck and severe dehydration. "And who was responsible for restraining the animal in this manner?" Director Simmons asked, pen poised over her form. A heavy silence filled the room. Emily glanced at Martha, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Richard Thornton," Emily stated clearly. "The sanctuary owner." Director Simmons made a note, her expression revealing nothing. "And what was the purpose of restraining the animal in this location, which I understand was in proximity to the lion enclosure?" Before Emily could respond, the clinic door opened once more. Richard entered, looking as though he had aged a decade overnight. The usual crisp suit had been replaced by a simple button-down shirt and khakis, and his silver hair was uncombed. "The purpose," he said, his voice steady despite his haggard appearance, "was punishment. I restrained Scout near the lion enclosure deliberately, knowing the feeding schedule and the likelihood that he would be at risk when the storm damaged the fencing." Director Simmons's eyebrows rose slightly at this frank admission. "You're admitting to intentional animal endangerment, Mr. Thornton." "I am." Richard moved fully into the room, standing tall despite the weight of confession. "I acted out of personal grievance and anger, placing both Scout and potentially the public at risk through my actions. There's no justification for what I did." Inspector Morales exchanged a glance with his superior. "That's unusually forthright, Mr. Thornton." "I've had a revelation of sorts, Inspector," Richard replied, a hint of his dry humor surfacing briefly. "Nothing quite like watching the animal you condemned save everything you've built to clarify one's perspective." Director Simmons turned to Emily. "We'll need your full medical assessment of Scout's condition. Dr. Walker, including detailed documentation of his injuries and treatment." "Already prepared," Emily replied, handing over a folder from her desk. "I've included comparison baselines from his previous checkups to demonstrate the acute nature of yesterday's injuries." The inspector flipped through the report, nodding with professional approval. "Very thorough. Now, regarding the lions that escaped. That responsibility is also mine." Richard interrupted. "Maintenance logs will show that I was warned about potential weakness in sections of the lion enclosure fencing 3 weeks ago. I deferred repairs due to budget constraints." Director Simmons made another note, her pen scratching audibly in the quiet room. "Mr. Thornton, given your admissions, you understand that this investigation could result in criminal charges as well as the suspension or revocation of your sanctuary's operating license?" Richard nodded grimly. "I understand completely." Martha stepped forward, placing herself beside her estranged husband in a gesture of unity that surprised everyone in the room. "Before you proceed further with your investigation, Director, there's something you should know. As of last night, ownership of Whispering Pines Wildlife Sanctuary is being transferred to a non-profit conservation trust." She handed over a folder containing legal documents. "Richard and I are stepping down from operational control. The sanctuary will be managed by a board of qualified professionals, including Dr. Walker and several conservation experts from Arizona State University." Director Simmons accepted the folder with visible surprise. "This is unexpected. We've also allocated substantial funds for immediate improvement of all animal enclosures," Richard added. "The work begins today, prioritizing safety upgrades throughout the facility." The director studied the documents carefully before addressing Richard again. "While these changes are commendable, Mr. Thornton, they don't negate the seriousness of yesterday's incidents. I'm still obligated to complete my investigation." "I wouldn't expect otherwise," Richard replied with dignity. "I'm prepared to accept whatever consequences are appropriate." A low whine from Scout's bed drew everyone's attention. The German shepherd was awake, his amber eyes alert as they moved from person to person before settling on Richard, despite his weakened state. Scout managed to lift his head, ears pricked forward attentively. Richard approached the bed slowly, a complex mixture of emotions playing across his features. He stopped at a respectful distance, meeting Scout's steady gaze. "I owe you an apology, soldier," he said softly, using the title with genuine respect rather than mockery. "What I did was unforgivable." To everyone's surprise, Scout responded with a soft woof and stretched his neck slightly, bringing his head closer to Richard. After a moment's hesitation, Richard extended his hand, allowing Scout to sniff it. The German shepherd gave his fingers a gentle lick. The simple gesture of forgiveness struck Emily with unexpected force, bringing tears to her eyes. Martha wasn't even attempting to hide her emotion, wiping openly at her cheeks. "Well, I'll be," Bobby murmured from his position by the door. "That dog's got more grace in his little toe than most humans have in their whole body." Director Simmons cleared her throat, visibly affected despite her professional demeanor. "Mr. Thornton, in light of these circumstances, I'd like to propose a conditional approach. While we must complete our investigation, I'm authorized to consider alternative resolutions in cases where genuine remediation efforts are underway." "What kind of alternative?" Martha asked cautiously. "A probationary period for the sanctuary under its new management structure, with enhanced oversight and regular inspections. Mr. Thornton would still face personal consequences for his actions, but the sanctuary itself might continue operating, provided all safety upgrades are completed according to an agreed timeline." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "That seems more than fair. What would these personal consequences entail?" "That would be for the county prosecutor to determine," Director Simmons replied. "But given your cooperation and the absence of prior violations, it would likely involve financial penalties, community service, and possibly a period of probation." "I'll accept whatever is decided," Richard said with quiet dignity. As the conversation continued, Deputy Wilson approached Emily, speaking in an undertone. "There's something else you should know. Doc, we recovered the security footage from yesterday, including the cameras near where Scout was tied." Emily glanced at him sharply. And it shows something mighty interesting." The deputy's weathered face creased in puzzlement. "According to the timestamp, someone opened the lion enclosure gate manually about 20 minutes before the storm hit its peak. It wasn't just wind damage like everyone assumed." Emily's eyes widened. "Someone deliberately released the lions who would—" Her question was interrupted by a commotion from the doorway as a young sanctuary staff member burst in, breathless with excitement. "Doctor Walker, you need to see this. The lions. Serena, she's at the fence line closest to the clinic. She's been there all night, according to the night watchman." Curiosity overrode protocol as everyone, including the investigators, followed the staff member outside. Sure enough, the older lioness was positioned at the very edge of her enclosure, her focus intently fixed on the clinic building. When she spotted the group emerging, her ears pricked forward, attention zeroing in on Scout, who had insisted on following despite Emily's protests, walking shakily at Richard's side. "I've never seen anything like it," Director Simmons murmured. "It's almost as if she's checking on him." "Perhaps she is," Martha said softly. "Scout helped save her pride yesterday." "Animals understand more than we give them credit for." As they watched, Serena made a soft chuffing sound, a vocalization usually reserved for friendly greetings among lions. Scout's ears perked up, and despite his weakened state, he responded with a dignified bark. Inspector Morales shook his head in wonder. If I hadn't seen it myself. The moment was interrupted by another staff member approaching Richard urgently. "Mr. Thornton, we found something during the cleanup that you need to see." The group followed as the staff member led them to the maintenance shed. Inside, carefully placed on a workbench, was a set of bolt cutters and a familiar silver key ring with access cards to every enclosure in the sanctuary. These were hidden behind the storage cabinets, the staff member explained. "And there's this too." He held up a small digital camera. "It has footage from yesterday, right before the storm hit." Richard took the camera, his brow furrowing as he powered it on and examined the most recent recordings. His expression shifted from confusion to shock. "Martha," he said, his voice barely audible, "you need to see this." Martha moved to his side, watching the small screen. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, my God!" Emily stepped closer. "What is it?" Richard turned the camera so everyone could see. The footage clearly showed Martha herself approaching the lion enclosure gate, deliberately unlocking it, and leaving it slightly ajar before walking away. All eyes turned to Martha, who stood frozen, her composure finally cracking. "It was you," Richard said, disbelief coloring his voice. "You released the lions." The sanctuary's conference room had never felt so small. Despite housing only a handful of people, Martha sat at the head of the oval table, her usual elegant poise abandoned as she stared at her trembling hands. Richard stood by the window, gazing out at the grounds where repair crews were already at work mending storm-damaged fences. Emily and Deputy Wilson occupied chairs opposite Martha, while the two animal welfare officials conferred in low voices at the far end of the table. Scout lay at Emily's feet, refusing to leave her side despite his weakened condition. "I think," Deputy Wilson finally said, breaking the heavy silence, "that it's time for Mrs. Thornton to explain exactly what happened yesterday." Martha looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. "It wasn't premeditated, if that's what you're wondering. I had come to the sanctuary to discuss our divorce settlement with Richard specifically. My desire to reclaim partial ownership rights." She glanced at her estranged husband. "When I arrived, Richard was in a meeting, so I decided to visit Michael's memorial bench near the education center." She paused, gathering herself. "That's when I overheard Bobby and one of the junior keepers talking. They didn't see me, but I heard everything about Scout being tied near the lion enclosure, about Richard's intentions." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "And you decided to take matters into your own hands," Richard supplied, his tone curiously devoid of accusation. Martha nodded. "I knew confronting you directly wouldn't work. You've been beyond reason when it comes to anything related to Michael these past 3 years. But I couldn't just leave, knowing what was going to happen to Scout." She straightened in her chair, some of her composure returning. "So, yes, I went to the lion enclosure and deliberately left the gate unlocked. I knew the storm would eventually push it open. My hope was that the commotion would force the staff to check all areas of the sanctuary, including where Scout was tied." A bitter smile touched her lips. "I never imagined the lions would actually find him, much less do what they did." Director Simmons leaned forward. "Mrs. Thornton, Deliberately releasing dangerous predators is a serious offense, regardless of your intentions. I'm well aware, Director, Martha replied with quiet dignity. And I'm prepared to accept the consequences, just as Richard is. Deputy Wilson rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. So, we have one sanctuary owner who tied up a dog near a lion enclosure, and another who released said lions. Quite the family business model you folks have going here. The unexpected touch of gallows humor broke the tension slightly. Richard actually chuckled, a dry, rusty sound that suggested it had been a long time since he'd laughed genuinely. 30 years of marriage, and she still finds ways to surprise me, he remarked, something like grudging admiration in his voice. Martha met his gaze directly. We've both made terrible mistakes. Richard, the difference is, I was trying to save a life, not take one. The barb landed visibly, Richard's momentary levity fading. He turned back to the window, shoulders hunched slightly beneath his shirt. The question now, Inspector Morales interjected, is how to proceed. We have 2 separate violations, both admitted to by the responsible parties. Emily had been silent throughout the exchange, her focus divided between the human drama unfolding and Scout's condition. Now she spoke up, her voice carrying the measured authority of her profession. If I may offer a perspective, she began, what happened yesterday was unquestionably wrong on multiple levels. Both Richard and Martha made dangerous, illegal choices that put animals and humans at risk. She looked between the estranged couple. But I also witnessed something extraordinary, something that I believe deserves consideration. Go on. Doctor, Director Simmons encouraged when Emily paused. I watched a dog who had every reason to be aggressive, fearful, or simply defeated instead rise to an incredible challenge. I saw him communicate with predators in a way that defies conventional understanding of animal behavior. And most remarkably, I saw him extend forgiveness to the very person who had condemned him to death. Emily's hand dropped to Scout's head, stroking gently between his ears. If Scout can find that grace, perhaps the rest of us can follow his example. Scout looked up at the mention of his name, his amber eyes alert despite his exhaustion, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. He rose shakily to his feet and moved to the center of the room, equidistant between Richard and Martha. For a moment, he simply stood there, looking between them with that uncanny intelligence that had struck Emily from their first meeting. Then, deliberately, he approached Richard first, pressing his muzzle briefly against the man's hand before crossing to Martha and doing the same. The simple gesture carried such emotional weight that even Director Simmons blinked rapidly, clearing her throat to mask her reaction. Well, she said briskly, returning to her clipboard. While that's certainly moving, we still have regulations to uphold. Deputy Wilson leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. You know, there's a principle in law enforcement called discretionary authority. Basically means we can consider context and intent when deciding how to apply the letter of the law. Director Simmons raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting we simply overlook these violations, Deputy? Not at all, Wilson replied easily. I'm suggesting we consider a restorative approach rather than a purely punitive one. He gestured toward the window, where sanctuary staff could be seen working on repairs. Shutting down this place doesn't help the animals. Sending either of the Thorntons to jail doesn't help the animals. What would help is ensuring this sanctuary operates better than it ever has before. Richard turned from the window, his expression unreadable. What exactly are you proposing, Deputy? A conditional resolution, Wilson suggested, looking to the animal welfare officials. The sanctuary transfers to the non-profit trust as planned. Both Thorntons make full restitution through community service, specifically by contributing their expertise to improve animal welfare standards here and at other facilities, regular inspections, full transparency, and mandatory training for all staff. Director Simmons considered this for a long moment, tapping her pen against her clipboard. It's irregular, she admitted, but not without precedent in cases where genuine remediation is the goal. Martha straightened, hope flickering across her features. We would both commit to whatever terms you set. Director, this sanctuary was our life's work. It should be our life's amends as well. Richard nodded slowly. I've spent 3 years running this place as a business, not as the sanctuary it was meant to be. I'm willing to dedicate whatever time I have left to restoring its original purpose. And Scout? Emily asked, the question directed at both officials and the Thorntons. The transfer of ownership to you stands, Dr. Walker. Richard confirmed. But I'd like to request visitation rights, if you're amenable. There are conversations I need to have with him. A faint smile touched his lips. One-sided as they may be. Director Simmons closed her folder with a decisive snap. I'll need to consult with my superiors, but I believe we can work with this approach, provided certain conditions are strictly met. She fixed both Thorntons with a stern gaze. This is not a free pass. There will be consequences, supervision, and zero tolerance for any future violations. Understood, Richard and Martha replied almost in unison. As the meeting concluded and the participants began to disperse, Emily found herself alone with Scout in the conference room. The German shepherd sat beside her chair, his posture perfect despite his injuries, watching her with those knowing eyes. Well, she told him softly, it seems you've managed to save more than just the sanctuary. She knelt to his level, gently checking the bandage around his neck. You may have saved a marriage, too, in your own way. Scout huffed softly, as if to say the humans were making entirely too much of his accomplishments. The door opened, and Bobby poked his head in. There you are, Doc. Thought you might want to see this. He gestured for her to follow. Curious. Emily and Scout followed the old groundskeeper outside to the viewing platform overlooking the lion enclosure. The pride was visible in the morning sun, lounging on the rocky outcroppings that dotted their habitat. As Emily watched, Serena, the older lioness, detached herself from the group and approached the fence line directly below their position. The big cat looked up, her tawny eyes fixing not on Emily or Bobby, but on Scout. The German shepherd's ears pricked forward with interest. Been happening all morning, Bobby explained with quiet wonder. Every time we move Scout to a different part of the sanctuary, she tracks him, follows along her enclosure to stay as close as possible to wherever he is. It's remarkable, Emily admitted. I've never seen anything like it between different species. Bobby leaned on the railing, the morning sun highlighting the weathered lines of his face. When you get to be my age, Doc, you start to believe there's more mystery in this world than we give credit for. Some connections don't need explaining, they just are." As if to illustrate his point, Scout gave a soft bark of greeting. Serena responded with that same chuffing sound from earlier, the vocalization lions typically reserved for their own kind. "You know," Bobby continued thoughtfully, "there's an old saying my granddaddy used to tell me, God's creatures recognize each other's spirits. Always thought it was just a pretty notion, but now," he gestured toward the unlikely exchange below them, "now I'm not so sure." Emily watched as Scout and Serena continued their silent communication across species boundaries, her scientific mind struggling to categorize what her heart recognized immediately, a connection that transcended conventional understanding. "He'll need a home with space," she said suddenly. "My apartment isn't suitable for a dog his size, especially one used to this much open area." Bobby smiled knowingly. "Martha mentioned she's keeping her house on the sanctuary property as part of the settlement, said it's too big for just her, and she'd welcome a certain four-legged roommate and his new owner, if they were interested. Comes with a job offer, too. Medical director for the new trust." Emily looked down at Scout, who had finally settled, lying with his head on his paws, still watching Serena below. In just 24 hours, her life had transformed completely. New job, new home, and a remarkable companion she had never expected. "What do you think, Scout?" she asked. "Ready for a new mission?" The German shepherd's tail thumped once against the deck, planking a clear, affirmative response. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting the sanctuary in golden light, Emily felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The road ahead would not be easy for any of them. Scout's recovery, the sanctuary's transformation, the Thorntons' journey toward redemption, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, the future seemed full of promise rather than mere obligation. And at the center of it all was Scout, the unlikely hero who had brought them together through bonds stronger than blood, transcending species, and teaching them all what courage and forgiveness truly meant. Folks, this tale of Scout, a military dog who faced betrayal but still chose courage, speaks to something deep in our souls. Remember when America valued loyalty and second chances? When we understood that our scars, like Scout's rope burns, don't define us, but reveal our strength. Scout's story reminds us of the veterans we've known, the faithful companions we've loved, and those moments when we too stood at crossroads between bitterness and forgiveness. How many of us have carried grief like Richard, letting it harden our hearts until we barely recognized ourselves, or made desperate choices like Martha, trying to right wrongs with our own flawed hands at our age. We've seen enough of life to know its cruelties, but also its unexpected mercies, like lions protecting instead of devouring, and enemies becoming allies. Perhaps you're wondering if it's too late for your own fresh start or healing of family wounds that have festered for years. Scout's story whispers to us that as long as we draw breath,